Hello and welcome to yet another edition of a World Panorama, where you get a complete roundup of all the biggest international news stories. I'm Ashwarya Kapoor with you. Let us begin the program with this week's top headlines. Indonesians vote in the world's biggest single-day election involving 192 million voters to choose a new president and parliament. Early results show President Joko Widodo on course for a second term. French President Emmanuel Macron pledges to rebuild Paris's beloved Notre Dame Cathedral even more beautifully after a raging fire destroys its spire and its roof but spares most of the structure. Inquiry into the cause of fire on. Egypt lawmakers pass constitutional amendments to boost President al-Sisi's power and lengthen his term potentially until 2030. To take effect, changes need to be endorsed in a referendum that is likely next week. And amid tribal violence and protests in Mali, Prime Minister, his entire cabinet resigns. Public was enraged by a massacre of some 160 Fulani herders by members of a rival community on 23rd of March. The big story coming in from Indonesia, which managed to pull off the world's most complex and largest single-day elections involving 192 million voters. With a turnout of over 80%, Indonesia held its first simultaneous presidential and legislative elections. Early results show President Joko Widodo is on course for a second term in office, with the incumbent moving comfortably ahead of his long-time rival, former military strongman Subianto. Official results are not expected until May, but the quick counts undertaken by polling companies have proved correct in the previous years. Indonesia's President Jokowi Widodo looks to be on course for re-election. This according to unofficial results released within hours of polls closing. Early quick counts of Wednesday's ballots put Jokowi on around 55% of the vote, with his rival, ex-general Prabowo Subianto, winning around 44%. Quick counts are conducted by a variety of credible polling agencies and have proved reliable in the past. Final official results will be announced by 22nd of May. Joko Widodo acknowledged that he had seen the initial results, but cautioned supporters to be patient and wait for the official count. Opposition party leader Prabowo also asked his supporters to remain calm and to continue to watch the results emerge.
Quick count result showed that Joko Widodo is leading, but no matter who is elected. Later, I hope he will help to bring Indonesia forward, reduce the employment rate and national debt. No matter if the leader will be Prabowo or Jokowi, I hope for the best for this country.
Indonesia voted on Wednesday in one of the world's largest one-day elections. For the first time, Indonesia held its presidential and legislative elections on the same day, with more than 2,45,000 candidates running for over 20,000 seats. More than 8 lakh polling stations and 6 million election workers helped to pull it off. Some 192.8 million people were eligible to cast vote across the archipelago's 17,000 islands.
I want the future government to eradicate poverty and open employment so that it can reduce unemployment.
The presidential race was a rematch of the 2014 contest between Widodo and Prabowo. Widodo is a former furniture salesman, and he focused his campaigns around his man of the people image. Under his leadership, the economy has grown steadily. However, critics say that he abandoned campaign promises to resolve human rights violations. He also quoted massive Chinese infrastructure investment. Meanwhile, Prabowo is closely associated with the traditional political elite. He was previously married to the daughter of former dictator General Suharto. He promised to review all Chinese projects in Indonesia if he becomes president. However, both the candidates, Widodo and Prabowo, made political moves in line with the increased prominence of conservative Islam in the country.
I think using religion in politics, like the current political situation, is wrong. I hope in the future, people in Indonesia will not be provoked by religious issues and that our politics could be more neutral.
The voting in Indonesia was by and large peaceful, but even before the voting began, the poll was hit with claims of vote rigging. An investigation was launched last week after videos emerged appearing to show thousands of stray ballot papers at a warehouse in neighboring Malaysia, many of them allegedly marked in favor of President Widodo. Meanwhile, in this election, Indonesians were actually asked to cast 5 ballots for the President and Vice President, for members of the 575-seat House of Representatives, for the Regional Representative Council or Senate, provincial legislatures and the district and city councils. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj has requested Indians in Libya's capital city Tripoli to leave immediately amid an emergency situation there. In a series of tweets, Sushma Swaraj made it clear that despite the massive evacuation and travel ban, there are over 500 Indian nationals in Tripoli. The situation in Tripoli is deteriorating fast. Presently, flights are operational, she said. Please ask your relatives and friends to leave Tripoli immediately. We will not be able to evacuate them later, she added. The situation has been worsening by the hour in Libya, where Khalifa Haftar, who was a former Libyan army officer, has launched an offensive in Tripoli and plans to take over the capital city. Over 200 people were killed in Tripoli in the last 2 weeks since Haftar's forces launched a strike to oust UN-backed Prime Minister AL-SARRAJ from power. Haftar's forces have carried out several attacks from the south and west of Tripoli this month, but the government and their allies, some militias, have slowed down the advance. There was shock as Paris's iconic Notre Dame Cathedral caught fire on Monday night. The firefighters managed to save the 850-year-old Gothic building's main stone structure, but the spire and the roof collapsed. The cathedral is among the most famous landmarks in Paris, drawing about 13 million visitors a year. President Emmanuel Macron lamented the destruction of an awe-inspiring building that embodied the heart of Paris for more than 800 years, but he pledged to rebuild it more beautifully, starting with the launch of an international fundraising campaign. Catastrophic fire engulfing Notre Dame Cathedral, which is among the most famous landmarks in Paris. The fire burned for several hours, destroying the 850-year-old cathedral's iconic spire and roof before firefighters contained the blaze early Tuesday morning. The fire started at around 18:30 local time on Monday and quickly reached the roof of the cathedral, destroying its stained glass windows and the wooden interior before toppling the spire. The fire was declared under control almost 9 hours after it started.
Well, I can tell you, when it's a monument you love and a monument you live in, which you celebrate, which represents so much in our history, it's really sad, and I'm asking God, why? Why? Because today is Holy Monday and it's an important week for us. And I'm saying, but Lord, why? I think I'll get the answer when I get to heaven.
The fire just days before Easter was met with horror by Parisians and tourists. As firefighters battled the blaze, Parisians gathered outside the church on Monday night, raising their voices in prayer. Some could be seen openly weeping, while others sang hymns.
Le Seigneur est avec vous, nous êtes
However, emergency teams did manage to rescue valuable artwork and religious items, including what is said to be the crown of thorns worn by Jesus before his crucifixion, which were stored inside the cathedral built in the 12th and 13th centuries.
It's horrible, just straightforward horrible. So I hope they'll be able to build it up again, and that they'll be able to actually, have something being repaired.
French President Emmanuel Macron has vowed to rebuild the medieval cathedral after the fire. Visiting the site on Monday night, Macron said that the worst had been avoided with the preservation of the cathedral's main structure. He also pledged to launch an international fundraising scheme for the reconstruction.
Le pire a été évité.
We will build this cathedral together, and it is undoubtedly part of the French destiny and a project for the years to come. We will rebuild Notre Dame because that's what the French expect, and because it is what our history deserves, because it's our underlying destiny.
The fire occurred as the cathedral was undergoing repairs. Sections of the building were under scaffolding as part of renovations, and 16 copper statues had been removed last week. Work began after cracks appeared in the stone, sparking fears that the structure could become unstable. World leaders expressed shock at the fire. US President Donald Trump said it was horrible to watch the fire. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel calling the Notre Dame a symbol of French and European culture. The Vatican also expressed shock and sadness. UNESCO said it stood at France's side to save and restore this priceless heritage, visited by almost 13 million visitors each year, more than the Eiffel Tower.
That puts a damper on what we're about to say, to be honest, because that is beyond countries, that's beyond anything. That's a part of our growing up, it's a part of our culture, it's a part of our lives. That's a truly great cathedral. And I've been there and I've seen it, and there's no cathedral. I think I could say there's probably no cathedral in the world like it. It's a terrible scene.
No other site represents France quite like Notre Dame. Its main rival as a national symbol, the Eiffel Tower, is a little more than a century old. Notre Dame has stood tall above Paris since the 1200s. The last time the cathedral suffered major damage was during the French Revolution. It survived 2 world wars largely unscathed. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And news from Egypt now, where lawmakers have passed constitutional amendments that would boost President al-Sisi's power and lengthen his term potentially until 2030. However, the changes need to be endorsed in a referendum to take effect. The national vote would likely take place next week. Now, critics say that the amendments bolster the role of military in political life and increase the president's power over the judiciary. They allege that the move is to strengthen al-Sisi's authoritarian rule. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi meeting US President Donald Trump last week. Sisi was warmly embraced by Trump at the White House despite concerns among US lawmakers and rights advocates about the repression of human rights in Egypt. But back home, Sisi is a step closer to extending his rule. Lawmakers on Tuesday approved sweeping constitutional amendments that would enable him to remain in power until 2030. The 596-member parliament, which is dominated by Sisi supporters, voted 531 to 22 in favor of the amendments. The amendments have moved quickly through the Egyptian legislature since they were first proposed in early February. Lawmakers in favor of amendments raised Egyptian flags and played nationalist songs before the vote began. Few MPs attempted to speak out against them, but those who did found their voices drowned by a chorus of nationalist fervor.
554 members have voted, 531 members have agreed, 22 members have rejected, and 1 member has abstained. Therefore, the 2/3 necessary majority is available for passing the constitutional amendments.
The changes would extend Sisi's current term to 6 years from 4 and then allow him to run again for another 6-year period. They also increase his control over the judiciary and confirm the military's role in politics. However, the changes still need to be approved in a referendum before they can come into effect. A date for the referendum has not been confirmed yet, but is likely next week. Campaigns encouraging Egyptians to participate in the referendum to confirm the changes are on. Posters and banners urging citizens to vote yes cover the streets of Cairo. The country's religious figures and celebrities also joined the effort in urging a high turnout.
At the end, what remains is the decision of those who own the sovereignty, the entrusted Egyptian people.
Sisi supporters claim that extending presidential term will benefit the country's stability after Sisi swept to power in a coup in 2013 and won an election with 97% of the vote a year later. They say constitutional changes are necessary to give him more time to complete major developmental projects and economic reforms. However, Sisi's critics say they concentrate more power in the hands of a leader accused by rights groups of presiding over a relentless crackdown on freedoms. Critics also say amendments would also bolster the role of military in political life and increase the president's power over the judiciary. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. News from West Africa now. Mali's Prime Minister and his entire government has resigned over a massacre in the central town of the country. 4 weeks ago, some 160 Fulani herders were killed by an ethnic vigilante group that shocked the nation. The resignations came a day after lawmakers discussed a possible motion of no confidence in the government, with the opponents criticizing the government for failing to disarm Islamist militias and to stem the violence in the Saharan nation. Prime Minister of Mali, Somelo Baubei Maiga, and his entire government have resigned following an upsurge of violence in the country. President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita said in a statement that he accepted Maiga and his minister's resignation. The resignation came after legislatures discussed a possible motion of no confidence in the government. After resignations, a prime minister will be named soon and a new government will be put in place after consultations with all political forces. The developments came after an attack in the central town of Ogosagu on 23rd of March, in which scores of herders were killed by a rival ethnic group. 157 people were killed brutally by suspected hunters from the Dogon community. Video clips shot by the International Committee of the Red Cross showed most of the village's burnt houses and farm buildings covered with a thick layer of red dust, their walls riddled with bullet holes.
They destroyed vehicles, people's homes. The damage is immense. They ransacked our mothers' homes. They made sure they left nothing behind. For the rest, we look to God.
Red Cross workers have come to the village to distribute food and to conduct discussion groups aimed at easing the survivors' emotional suffering.
Quand on parle d'événements traumatiques de ce genre,
when we talk about traumatic event of this kind, the pain is not just physical, the damage is also psychological.
Mais ce sont également des dégâts psychologiques.
The United Nations also dispatched human rights experts to the area to investigate the killings, and the International Criminal Court also said that the crimes could fall under its jurisdiction.
UNICEF is deeply saddened and outraged that children are among the victims. According to first reports from local medical services, 1/3 of the casualties are children, with further verification still ongoing. 31 children are also injured. The injuries sustained by children are mostly gunshot injuries, burns, and fractures.
Thousands of people also rallied in the Malian capital to protest at the failure of the government and international peacekeepers to stem rising violence. The protest was called by Muslim religious leaders Organizations representing the Fulani herding community, opposition parties and civil society groups.
Everyone, government, majority leaders, members of the assembly. Everyone should be here today to say together no confusion, no barbarity, so that together we say no more of this in Mali, no more of this in Mali.
The 23rd March violence was part of a wider surge in ethnic and jihadist violence across Mali and neighboring Burkina Faso and Niger. Mali has been struggling to control violence since Al-Qaeda-linked Islamist extremists gripped the desert north of the country in 2012. Despite an ongoing military drive and a 2015 peace agreement, jihadists still dominate huge areas of the country. Militants in fact shifted from the north towards the more densely populated center of the country, where they have sharpened ancient rivalries and ethnic conflicts. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. Thousands of people took to the streets of central London this week, blockading some of the UK capital's busiest roads and bridges to raise alarm over a mounting climate crisis. The demonstrations are part of a global campaign orchestrated by British climate organisation Extinction Rebellion, which is demanding governments take decisive action on climate and ecological emergency. The group says that it will hold rallies in at least 80 cities across more than 33 countries in the world to push for their cause. Activists around blankets. Children skateboarding on a makeshift ramp. This is not picnic, but an organised roadblock on London's Waterloo Bridge on Monday, which is part of a bid to force the government to do more to tackle climate change. Other locations in London that were blocked included Marble Arch, Oxford Circus, Parliament Square and Whitehall. The protests are being led by the British climate group Extinction Rebellion. The group is demanding the government declare a climate and ecological emergency, reduce greenhouse emissions to net zero by 2025, and create a citizens' assembly of members of the public to lead on decisions to address climate change.
The government's not doing enough about climate change. We need to raise awareness of how serious it actually is and get them to do something about it.
The activists sang songs and held signs that read, "There is no planet B" and "Extinction is forever" at some of the UK capital's most iconic locations. The roadblocks will continue night and day at each side, and the demonstrators say the protest could last at least a week.
I hope we haven't left it too late. We should have been doing this 20 years ago. And I know there are organisations who were, but sadly the petitions, the consciousness raising has not worked, and this is the time to take more action.
The protests also flared as some buildings were vandalized. Number of people were taken into custody, majority being detained on suspicion of public order offences. The protest disrupted normal life, with roads being blocked and as a result suspension of transport services. London's police advised people travelling around the city to allow extra time for their journey.
Rising up, time has come to stir things up, stealing the future of this planet from your children, my children and their children.
The protests come after Extinction Rebellion Group wrote to Prime Minister Theresa May outlining their demands and asking for face-to-face talks, warning that they will escalate their disruptive actions over the coming weeks unless the government acts. Protesters say climate change was more pressing than the issue of Brexit.
Truly believe that in this climate of the world right now, it's just really important. There's so much other less important things going on, like Brexit. I really think it's just ridiculous. There's so much time and energy going towards it, so much attention, and yet nothing. Like, how will there be a Brexit if there's no world to live in?
Extinction Rebellion has emerged as one of the leading organizers of climate change action in the UK, alongside the school strike movement, which has seen thousands of young people skip class to demand action on climate change. Since the group launched in 2018, Extinction Rebellion members have blocked bridges and also protested in Britain's parliament. They have declared their international rebellion would continue, and protests are expected in dozens of countries around the world. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And finally, the only known female of the Yangtze giant soft-shell turtle died this week in China's Suzhou Zoo. The 90-year-old turtle died following an artificial insemination procedure. This is a disastrous loss to a species facing extinction. Its death leaves only 3 Yangtze giant soft-shell turtles known to exist in the world. One of them is a 100-year-old male in Suzhou Zoo, and the other 2 of unknown gender are in Vietnam. The species has suffered from hunting, overfishing, and destruction of its habitat. Take a look at the visuals of the rare turtle species as I take your leave. I'll see you next week in another edition of World Panorama. Bye-bye.